Hello, and welcome to the CivilNet studio. Today our guest is Eleanor Monbiot. She's the Middle East and Eastern Europe Regional Director for World Vision, which is a humanitarian and development NGO that's been supporting tens of thousands of children and their families, particularly in the border regions of Armenia. She's here to tell us about World Vision's major shift to becoming self-funding, how they've managed to do it, and what kinds of projects they've been doing for Armenians. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here and learn about what World Vision does better. So you focus on vulnerable children and families in the most difficult areas, what you call fragile contexts. So what does that mean in Armenia and the wider Caucasus region?
So we've been here in Armenia for coming up to 36 years, and initially we came in as part of the earthquake response. And very often World Vision starts its work in response to a major emergency. But as soon as possible, we look to having long-term sustainable change, breaking intergenerational poverty and ensuring that every child can have hope and opportunity. And as you mentioned, the border areas of Armenia have been very volatile, most recently just in the last year or so. So while we work across the country, we have been focusing since September 23 on those displaced from Nagorno-Karabakh and have supported them across the country to have emergency needs, but also to reintegrate, find livelihoods, and really find that hope and opportunity again. In addition, we focus on the most vulnerable children across the country. And that vulnerability might come because of disability. It might come because of lack of economic opportunities, issues within the home. And so we work with the children and their families to ensure that they have the right foundations to be able to move forward.
There's so many things, whether it's Nagorno-Karabakh refugees, to the disabled people. We don't have those structures fully in place to support them. So it's vital having groups like you here to fill that gap. And so at a time when international charities and these organizations are facing all sorts of challenges, World Vision in Armenia appears to be very strong, and it's managing to become self-funding. Yeah. What does that mean exactly? And how did you get to that point?
So World Vision is active in 100 countries worldwide. And traditionally, 20 of those countries was raising funds for the other 80 countries. And the normal flow of money coming from the global north to the global south. But World Vision, whether we are prophetic, whether we have vision, or whether we just have good analysts, we looked out 10 years ago and said things are already changing. The dynamic is changing of money flow. So nearly 10 years ago, we identified 10 countries that we felt were on the right trajectory. Still had issues, still had concerns, but whether politically, economically, geographically, could start raising their own money. And Armenia was one of those, Georgia was another. Also within our region, we have Bosnia and Romania. So World Vision has walked alongside of those countries over the last 10 years, lowering the amount of money that comes from sort of the World Vision International and increasing their ability to raise money locally. And we have been so blessed with the result, because out of those 10 countries that we earmarked nearly a decade ago, 9 of those countries are now what we call self-funded countries. And here in Armenia, the office still gets money from donors such as the European Union, used to be from US government, but that's a whole different story.
Like we said, a lot of challenges right now.
Yes. From German government, etc. So they still get money in that traditional area. They also get money directly from the government of Armenia, which is fantastic, and that is to run the 6 children and family centers. So that partnership's incredibly important. But we also heavily rely and are very grateful to our Armenian donors, either individuals or maybe corporates or foundations, both here in Armenia, but particularly across the diaspora. And so some of them are doing what we call sponsorship. So that's a single donation each month, but every month, to support a family in the most vulnerable areas of Armenia. And that ranges from $21 a month to $33 a month, depending on the package. And that provides long-term, meaningful, sustainable change, both to that family, but to the wider community. And then some of our Armenian donors are maybe come from corporates or foundations and are able to come alongside us and say, we would like to work on a multi-year project to rebuild a centre, undertake life skills with youth, help with economic development. So there's a wide range of support. But without that support, World Vision Armenia certainly wouldn't be where they are today.
It's interesting because I've been in Armenia for about 12 years on and off, and in those early days of me being here, there was almost no, the idea of corporate responsibility and reaching out, it just hadn't developed yet. Yeah. But over the past 5 to 10 years, we've seen that grow, and I suppose then that is what's fueling you guys.
It is. I would say, though, that some environments are easier than others. So, for example, in EU countries, as you probably know, there's tax incentives for corporate social responsibility. So our office in Romania is able to fully leverage that. Oh. And so I would certainly appeal to the government here that if you really want corporates to take on more of that responsibility and make that sustainable, it is always aided by some tax incentives. So because we don't have that so much here in Armenia, it's still a very young and maturing area of work.
That's some fascinating insight. And you mentioned the government and that they are funding some things, but there are other regulations and things that they could pass that could make this easier. Have you been collaborating with the government for this kind of systemic change and regulatory strengthening? That's what's needed to really keep these things strong and sustainable.
Absolutely. And in fact, just before this interview, I was with the Ministry of Social Affairs and really, really excited to hear the new policies around both child protection, but also around disability rights. And these are cutting edge. I haven't seen these even in highly developed countries. I'm very excited about how they are absolutely assuring the rights of the most vulnerable. Now, we know that in any government, there's a huge difference between passing a policy and implementing a policy. And then the third part of the pie, reporting on the implementation of the policy. So this is where World Vision can really come alongside the government. And in fact, that's exactly the conversation we were having today. And they were saying to us, we really need World Vision to be our partner, to say, how do we take these words on a page and make them a reality so that every vulnerable child in Armenia is able to fulfill their potential and has their rights met.
I had no idea that there are these cutting edge policies. Yeah. I love learning this from our guests because I wouldn't know that otherwise. I don't get to meet with the government ministers in that respect. So I love when you guys come to us and tell us these things and our audience as well.
Well, one of the exciting things is the project we've just started with them, which is around the new disability rights, includes training 60 journalists and social media influencers and people so they can tell the story on behalf of the rights holders and the government, because you're quite right. Otherwise, who knows? So I'm sure we'll be coming back to you very soon as part of this program.
Oh, that's wonderful, because that's part of breaking the stigma around disability issues. That's one of the most difficult things that they have. So putting this more out there and letting people see, this is a fact of life and it's not something to be ashamed of is what we need to get that moving. So another, aspect of people who need help right now are the displaced from Artsakh. And you've supported, I have a number of more than 16,000 people from there. So was this support on an emergency, urgent basis? Because it came along out of nowhere, so to speak. There was a blockade for 9 months, but few people really thought or hoped to think that it would, that it was going to end that way. And so is this now continuing? I have the same questions about USAID, because I know USAID and Samantha Power were down there at the border when it happened, but now USAID is pretty much gone. So I'm not even sure what the respect is with that. So that's just to say that this is a very, very difficult area that needs a lot of support. And so how is World Vision collaborating to make this happen?
Yeah, so in any response, whether it is forced displacement, conflict, natural disasters, we very much work on a phased approach. So you're right, that first 90 days is basic needs: food, water, shelter. And World Vision was responding within 12 hours of the mass movement. We had already been engaged over the years with many of those who've been forcibly displaced. So for those first 3 months, we were providing parcels of food, cash, vouchers, etc. From that point, you really want people to be feeling empowered. So you don't want to just be giving them food. You want to be giving them the opportunity to purchase their own food, to have some feeling of self-respect back. So we then shifted with our partners, including the UN, to what we call cash and vouchers, which might sound very obvious, but it's quite a sort of a detailed technical thing. And it relies on us understanding the market. Can the market sustain people coming in with vouchers and buy off the market? So for the last couple of years, we've been doing that cash and vouchers. That is going down because the donors are not there. But we've also been working this last year or so to work with individual families to say, how do we support your livelihoods? What is your profession? How do we get you back into that profession? The other absolutely critical part has been mental health and psychosocial support. We can never underestimate the level of trauma that forced displacement and living under a blockade for so long as well. I mean, it wasn't a single day, has not just on the family today, but often intergenerational trauma. And we know that unless we can engage very, very quickly with these mental health issues, they can become very, very serious, lifelong mental health issues, which prevent people from taking employment, having relationships, etc. So we've been working through various children and family centres to work not just with the children, but also with their caregivers. And I was reflecting with the team today the changes that they've seen. And many of the children in those first few months of displacement couldn't talk properly, couldn't engage. When they drew pictures, they were all black. Now you see them drawing flowers and celebrating and chatting and engaging because you're able to make the change in their mental health.
And one last question, kind of more personal for you. You've worked in 40 different countries. That's a lot. What are the bullet points that kind of mark success in these places? You know, does your good work take root and spread? And however you answer it, how does that apply to Armenia as well and what you see here?
Yeah. So yes, I've had a very privileged and long career all over the world. And I would say prior to COVID, I really could look back and say we are making really fundamental, meaningful change in the lives of individuals, families, communities, and countries. We were seeing every single poverty indicator improving, whether that was nutritional status, health status, income. Countries that 20, 30 years ago, I mean, it was absolutely devastated, were sustainable and moving forward. COVID had a very, very profound effect. And last year, we had 90% of what we call the development goals, our sustainable development goals, were going in the wrong direction. Before COVID, they were all going in the right direction. And it's very challenging personally because you think about your legacy, what you've spent your whole career doing, and it's going in the wrong direction. But we know how to reverse it. You know, we've had that experience. So I'm still very hopeful and I'm still very positive. I think you have to be to do this work. And I see so many beacons of light, and Armenia is one of them. I first came here maybe 10 years ago, and even just in that short period, the change is absolutely phenomenal. And people like yourself coming back, you know, the level of skill and professionalism, and we were reflecting just this afternoon with the ministry, that if we can really have genuine peace in this country without the threats of your noisy neighbors, there is nothing stopping Armenia. And so when I look across the world, every individual in the world wants the same thing for their children. They want hope, opportunity, and peace. And where that's not happening comes down to poor leadership and poor governance, whether in your own country or the neighbours. So if we can all continue to stand firm and to advocate for good governance and to try and turn the tide of some of the madness that we're seeing, I have absolutely no doubt that whatever country we're looking at in the world has every opportunity to see a wonderful future, including Armenia. Well,
thank you. I hope your optimism is contagious. I feel like it is. And just this talk was really fascinating. We dove not just into World Vision, its mission, but a lot of the bigger picture ideas about, what the world needs. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing all that.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
And thank you for joining CivilNet.